15 and 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters, 14300 East Alameda Avenue. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium. 315 and 314, there is at least one person that's been shot, but they're saying there's hundreds of people just running around. So they're saying it happened Theater 9 where Batman was playing, but another RP is saying they're still shooting.
316, I need a rescue in here. Hospital got a guy shot.
16, we got another person outside shot in the leg, a female. I got people running out of the theater, they're shot in room 9.
Get us some damn gas masks for Theater 9. We can't get in it. 16, I got 7 down in Theater 9. 7 down. I've got a child victim. I need rescue at the back door of Theater 9 now. Inside of the theater is secure. We're bringing out bodies now. Get someone to the back as soon as you can. Rescue personnel. I got at least 3 to 7 hits.
I'm 9 News reporter Brandon Ritteman on the scene of breaking news in Aurora right now. A late night, apparently multiple shooting incident at a movie theater in Aurora. I'm going to step out of the shot so that we can show you exactly where we are. We are on the northeast side of the Century 16 theaters, which are in the town center of Aurora.
July 2012, 24-year-old James Holmes would walk into the Century 16 movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. He was attending the 12 a.m. premiere screening of the newest Batman movie The Dark Knight. Says roughly 20 minutes into the movie James would fake a phone call and make his way to the emergency exit to his right as hell as he uses a picnic tablecloth clip to keep the door just slightly open buttoned enough to arouse suspicion. On its side he walked over to his parked car, geared himself up head to toe in ballistic armor and a gas mask, whilst at the same time equipping himself with a Remington 870 shotgun, an AR-15 and a Glock pistol. Approximately 10 minutes later James would walk back through that some emergency exit and, like fish in a barrel, would open fire on around 400 moviegoers, killing 12 of them and injuring 70. How did we get here? A shooter with no criminal record, had no ties to any terror organizations, wasn't known to any law enforcement agency, but was able to carry out a massacre that no one in recent American history had ever seen before. Let's rewind back to the 13th of December 1987, where James Egan Holmes is born to parents Robert and Arlene He grew up in Oak Hills, Monterey County in California along with his sister, and was said to have had a fairly decent upbringing in a good neighborhood. Throughout his early years he was described as a well-mannered, smart and shy kid, but was fairly outgoing. Being of the 15 boys who played for his local football team with his dad, he coached. Family life at home was good as well. Both siblings had parents who supported them in every aspect of their lives, and James and his sister Chrissy was said to have had a close bond with each other. James' mother would even go on to say that it was a childhood tonvi. Whilst attending middle school no aged 11, James' mental health would begin to deteriorate. He would start to exhibit signs of chronic depression and even attempted to commit suicide. He would claim to see shadowy figures which called nail ghosts, accompanied by flickers in the corner of his eyes. These shadowy figures would hammer on the walls at night and would fight each other with firearms and various other weapons. But it is believed that James would have homicidal thoughts from the young age of 10 years old, where he will picture himself killing people who annoyed him or upset him. He would later in picture killing people who did nothing to him at all. The mental decline further when a house relocation was made 400 miles away to Sandiego. Holmes recalls welling up as the car pulled away from what had been a somewhat happy life with many young friends, and it's believed on that car journey he would attempt to cut his wrists with a piece of cardboard. When he arrived in San Diego he had trouble making friends and began to withdraw into his room, where he'd spend most of his days playing video games. His mom would quite literally go door to door to look for playmates, but the boys in their new neighborhood weren't exactly the friendliest. After spending all of his time indoors now, when not at school, he'll go on to become one of the top 5 players in the world at the video game Warcraft 3. Although making this achievement, James' mother recounts around this time that he had lost his joy and felt guilty that, no matter what did, she couldn't make him happy anymore. Looking back, she chalked this behavior up to a tough adjustment, but she goes on to say realistically it was the early signs of his mental illness, because, although we've been over how Jim's mental health had started to deteriorate from a young age, this was all behind closed doors, and his parents were none the wiser to the breakdown of his mental health. Even though he had been reserved in his social life, James was still an exceptional student, going on to achieve good grades throughout middle school, and he was even involved. Would be quoted as saying this about James: he was not particularly a good runner, and he lacked proper four-man stamina, but he always showed up to practice. He rarely spoke, however declined to take part in team-building activities, continuing he was a part of us, but not a part of us. He was kind of like a shadow figure. In 2006 James graduated from high school, and seeing as both his father had degrees in mathematics and science and his mother was a registered nurse, James wanted to follow a similar career path, so he decided that he wanted to study neuroscience at UC Riverside in California. Before the course had started, had wanted to have a taste of what it was like in that line of work, so in the summer he attended a prestigious 8-week-long internship at Salk Institute for Biological Studies. When this footage started to do their rounds in the years that followed, people claimed that this behavior didn't match that of a socially awkward person who has serious mental health issues. John Jacobson, supervisor of the lab, said that throughout his time he was there, had tried to sit down for lunch with James at least half a dozen times and tried to make conversation with him, but found it impossible because he was extremely shy. Also described James as an unusual bit intern. Jacobson said he repeatedly tried to explain to James exactly how to do the computer programming he had to skim with, but he kept on insisting in a different approach, one that didn't work. James had been given a project on this 8-week internship and he never completed it. After the internship had ended, John had emailed James to ask if wanted to try and complete that project, but he never got a response. Either way, James would finish the internship and attended UC Riverside, where he studied neuroscience, and in 2010 he received his undergraduate bachelor's degree with highest honors, but ended up skipping his graduation ceremony, more than likely due to his social anxiety. After graduation he applied to 6 top graduate schools to study for a doctorate in neuroscience. Although academically bright, his shyness and interviews appeared to work against them, and so he would go on to be rejected by all 6 universities. In 2010, after his dreams of going on to further study in his field had collapsed, he decided to move back home with his parents and seemingly had no purpose in life. Sleeps, eats and plays video games all day, going back to his old ways. But no, as an adult he's pushed by his parents to go and get a job. He secured himself a Monday till Sunday he was offered full-time placement, but in his own words couldn't see himself doing that line of work for the rest of his life. During this time his parents continued to push him to apply for graduate schools, which did Iowa, Illinois and Colorado. Offered him interviews, but he still presented poorly. He was described as being aloof. Quito perceived him to be disinterested, not a good fit for the program. In fact, some people who interviewed him would go on to say, quote, "Do not take this guy under any circumstances," even though he didn't seem like a good fit. Illinois and Colorado offered him a placement with him, accepting the latter as they offered him more financial aid, and so it seemed as if James had his purpose back once again, got into the competitive neuroscience program, where only 6 students per year get accepted. The program consists of 2 things. The first would be classes in the fall and spring, just like any author course, but the other half is something called a lab rotation. You get 3 in a year, and this basically consists of a research project under the supervision of a faculty trainer. But if for whatever reason you don't get accepted into one after a somewhat trial period, then you get kicked off the program. All 3 will end up going badly for James, and when the time came to choose a lab he decided to go with the first professor was described in his evaluation as showing a lack of communication skills and again showing a lack of interest, something that a student would need moving forward, so he was declined on that basis. During the first and second lab rotations, he started to see a go beautifully short, while after the second lab rotation they would go on to break up. After the deterioration of his performance and the breakup with his girlfriend, James decided to see the university counselor. When he met the counselor, she asked him if he was suicidal, to which he denied, but he did tell her he was having homicidal thoughts. The counselor would go on to say this wasn't a concern, as many students had came to her before with homicidal ideations, and because James stated he had no specific target, had no plans, no delusions and no hallucinations in regards to these homicidal ideations, the counselor concluded that he wasn't a threat. He was eventually passed on to the university psychiatrist Dr. Lynn Fenton. Similar things were reported, but when Dr. Fenton pressed him about the homicidal comments that he made, he responded, quote, "People are my problem, and the only solution is to kill everyone, but that can't happen because it isn't realistic." She concluded that he might have Sosh gives him some medication, and Aj doesn't pose a threat because Hedenity self-mutilates, doesn't plan on committing suicide, and doesn't plan on killing anyone. That was all to say Facet though, because deep down inside of Jamishulms, he had something cooking up that will fruition in the months that followed. You see, although he'd been telling Dr. Fenton, he basically didn't pose a threat in His journal it painted a whole different side of him, and Ifanian would have known what was in his journal. I probably wouldn't be making this video right now. In his journal Hes quoted as saying he can't tell the therapists who he called mind rapistitious plans, because if he did his normal life would combine with his ideal enactment of working on his homicidal ideations, and his plans would end up foiling. He said he would continue to have his guard up and deflect any incriminating questions. If they asked if had a plan, he would continue to deny them, because if he did go on to spill beans, they would have him locked up and he wouldn't be able to go on and kill people around this time. Hess mailing back and the conversation, for example, she says that killing people is too much effort and that he'd get thrown in jail for it. Harrisbins, that's why you'd kill many people. And if you wait until the end of your life, there's nothing to lose. The conversation goes on for a while, but the value of life becomes the focal point. James would go on to say, quote, there is nothing more valuable than a human life. You take away the life of a person, you take away the experiences of that person, and you take away all of their potential. His ex would prod him to pin up about what he exactly meant to which he responds, it's human capital again. When questioned what he's going to do with all that human capital from having taken away all of those people's lives, he responds of a more meaningful life. But the thing is, James doesn't even know what it means to himself. All he can explain is that it's just what he wants to do. His ex would go on to explain it won't fulfill his purpose, but he believes it will grant him a more meaningful life. By the time April of 2012 comes around, James decided to nip things in the bud with his ex-girlfriend, saying he just simply can't be friends with her anymore. In the two part ways, around 2 weeks later he's back to Cedar Fenton once again, still sticking to his plan, keeping Agward up, and he denies having any suicidal thoughts and outright refuses to talk about any homicidal thoughts. Butans again, Dr. Fenton sends him on his way, saying he poses no threat. The following month in May, James continued to perform great in his exams, not so great in that third lab rotation, and because of this, he felt like once again his purpose in life was slipping away because of his bad performances at university. So he decided he would find himself a new purpose in life. In his journal he begins to hatch a plan on how could kill people to make himself feel better. His failed performance actual, he notes, would act as the somewhat catalyst for the motivation behind the killings. In this plan his first thoughts were bombs, but he recounts they'll be way too suspicious later. He thought about biological warfare, but scripts the idea because it requires too much knowledge and chemical use. Hependers on serial murder heavily. His plan would be buy a stun gun shaped like a phone, equip himself with a folding knife, head over to National Park forest trails, and one by one pick off his victims. But noit's way too personal. It would be a sit get caught, it leaves too much evidence, and most of all it's not in a kill, so his last resort would be mass murder, and then the light bulb switched on, maximum casualties, and can be performatically with firearms, which would also mean it was less personal. He does note that there's a 99 chance of being caught, but he didn't mind because he said he didn't fear the consequence. Now that his type of attack is planned out, it was time to choose the location. He thought about an airport, but quickly aborted the idea due to the heavy security presence, and did it be too linked to terrorism. See, he didn't want people concluding this act of mass murder was based on terrorism, because that wasn't his message. The message was, he said there was no message. He eventually chose Century 16 movie theater, Basadrolli, 4 miles from his apartment in Aurora, Colorado. It's the perfect location in his mind. It's proximal to where he lives, it's isolated, it's large. So what a better place to case and plan for mass murder than an inconspicuous entertainment facility. He started to map out the theater in detail, both outside and in, and he began assessing the different theater rooms, talking about best approach and quickly criticizing the ones that have too many exits. Theater 9 and 10 became primary targets because in both
I put then what happened? Then an employee came out to the dumpster and threw something away, but I had to tinted windows and the sun showed up, so they didn't see me. They heard that. I heard them.
What do you think about when they came up?
Didn't interrupt the process. But I didn't think that's something that I said would be there after review objections.
If they had somehow interrupted the process, what would you do?
I had a handgun on my passenger driver's side that I could use.
Were you okay to do that first time?
Yeah.
At what point did you tell the behavioral health something that happened. If you can, I'd like to share everything.
I'll call it, but I can hear anybody on the other line.
I'd like you to make that.
This one last to the chance to see if I should turn back or not.
As far as I know, your second was fine, the whole town.
Right.
And you didn't hear any answer, electronic or personal or otherwise. And you said 9 seconds. And you gonna count them off or show up your phone on or whatever?
So like call ended after 9 seconds.
I'm sorry.
It said call ended after 9 seconds.
Remember what you thought or felt or when nobody answered?
Then shortly after I felt the FBI was coming.
Walk me through, you go in through the outer door, then what happens? What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell?
First the chair gets cancer while I was still outside the door. And it made a hissing sound. And I went inside and casted over my right side of the ear.
Really good.
Then it was autopilot. Then my wings were shot down. And so people were getting up and off the back of the car. So she went that direction. And then I don't remember any of the other shots that were shot down.
Any idea why those people were getting up and back up?
Well, they can see me like that in front of them.
So you shot in that direction. You know what you witnessed?
I heard a scream. Yeah.
You shot how many times during the accident?
I think the time
Response time would be, and how much ammo would need. The police response time would roughly be 3 minutes, and so had to do something about that. Just birthed one in mind, though, because it will become more relevant as the story continues throughout May. James would go to buy various items that he would eventually use for the shooting, such as a Glock pistol, a shotgun, a gas mask, anti-air gas. Then towards the end of them, and he continued to see Dr. Fenton, but this time she brought in Dr. Robert Feinstein, a specialist in violence and suicide assessment. Dr. Feinstein will take charge of this meeting to see if Heckle grasped what was going on with James. Ultimately, James was able to pull Thewell over his eyes as well, because after denying having any targets, any suicidal thoughts, and agreeing to come back for more counseling, he's let go once again, and they know that he's showing signs of stability, hence why he's able to leave at the start of June. James takes his preliminary exams but fails them. Of course, around this time he had also not been chosen to do a laboration, so he feels like quitting. He goes to Cedar Fenton again, where he tells her he's going to quit the program to find a job in Aurora for the next few months because the lease on his apartment didn't end until November. She quizzed him on various things such as student to see if this would affect his mental health moving forward, but he didn't have any. In fact, he had around $10,000 in the bank. Dr. Phantom would ask James to continue to come back and see her, even if he quit program, to which he would go on to say that his insurance wouldn't cover it, and then he got up and left. That was the last time he would see Dr. Fenton. Should go on to call family members and program leaders to ask them about how James was, and although they claimed he was odd and had social problems, they agreed on one thing, and that was he wasn't a violent individual. But of course they'd be proven wrong, so James decided to leave the course, and throughout June he continued to gear up in order to act out on his plan. Now only having one purpose in life, he bought an AR-15 laser sight, tens of magazines for his guns, a case for his rifle, a bullet locker jacket, a helmet tie, puncturing devices, first aid dressing, and quit literally thousands of rounds of ammunition. In July he continues his shopping spree, buying a ballistic trousers, rifle scopes, more ammunition, neck protection, arm protection, groin protection, and purchases a second gun. He would also acquire Bluetooth headphones and an iPod, as he didn't want to make the shooting feel personal, so he'd pop the headphones in so he could shoot people and not hear them scream. He decided to dye his hair red, not to match that of the Joker like many people, of rather to stand out, where he later would explain it was exotic and it would look better than green or blue. No, remember how I said that he needed to do something about the quick policy response time? Well, to combat this, on the 18th of July 2012, first an RC car was placed by some bins near his apartment building He put a boombox by the car, which would be silent for 40 minutes, and then that will be followed by loud music on top of the RC car, was a remote, but remote wasn't for the car or the boombox, it was for the detonation system in the apartment, so in turn a random person would walk up to this boombox car and remote, trying to maybe turn it if they might use the remote buddy of just blown the building up the next way, which James was banking on was inside the apartment itself again. He set his computer to play loud music around 20 to 25 minutes after he left the building. This in turn would summon people to open the door and then blow the building up. This nearly worked but ultimately failed after a neighbor was shocked by the music and pounded on Jim's door to no response. She advantaged the door handle and realized it was open, but for whatever reason she decided to go back to her apartment and call for the police. The only thing is though all the police were heading towards Century 16 Theater to reports of an active shooter, and on a quick side note, the explosives would eventually be safely removed by the bomb squad and there would be no reported casualties in regards to the apartment block. Rewinding the clock ever so slightly, and James would leave his booby-trapped apartment to head for the Century 16 movie theater. He took a Viking because feared he might get shot, and the medication would make it less painful. Since arriving at the theater, he parks around the back just outside of THEATR 9. Then walks around to the entrance where he picks up his ticket from a kiosk desk. He hands it to the attendant and makes his way to the concession stand. He loiters briefly, but eventually will make his way to Theater 9. Although his ticket had been for Theater 8. You go in the theater, or what's it like? What are you seeing and hearing as you go in the theater? Bullets, blood, brains and bodies is how the prosecution described the horrific scene that James left behind. In that short period of time he opened fire on around 400 moviegoers, killing 12. The youngest 6-year-old Veronica Sullivan and a further 70 were injured. But words just simply can't describe the mayhem that was rained upon those innocent people that day. From the details we know, bullets flew across the theater, hitting multiple people in their heads and bodies as they ran for safety and decayed for cover behind chairs. James would later say he specifically aimed for people who were escaping to deter more from doing